Welcome to this short presentation on how an audience response system can be used in supporting student learning. As you can tell from the slide, I propose to cover three main points. Firstly, I want to argue or propose the case that an EVS, or an audience response system, offers a great opportunity to enhance the learning experience through improving the feedback and mechanisms in our face-to-face teaching situations. However, I don't want to say that an EVS, or an audience response system, is a silver bullet. It needs to be integrated into a much wider feedback strategy. Finally, I want to start to look at some of the other emerging technologies that you might use in face-to-face teaching to enhance feedback and engagement, in particular the use of SMS. Now, the way I'm going to cover this, or I'm proposing to cover this, is to follow the narrative of a stroll along a winding road. I'll be stopping off to further explore ideas as I stumble across them, and to help you make similar discoveries on your journey, I'll be making reference to some key articles which I'd suggest you follow up. So where should I start? I'm going to connect effectiveness of an ARS system, an audience response system, in face-to-face teaching to learning through the feedback model. Well, I'm going to be using Brown et al., as you see from the quote on the slide, who I'm taking their view that assessment is the engine which drives learning, especially in higher education. However, the student's effectiveness in terms of their assessment is maximised by feedback. Therefore, to understand how classroom voting systems can influence learning, we need to understand how formative feedback changes performance. And to help our appreciation, I'll then like to first focus on a few characteristics of classroom voting systems. As you see, I've selected 5, and in my opinion these are key characteristics of an EVS. I kind of could synthesise them as follows. An EVS is very simple. It is very simple technology. It's what I would term a low threshold technology. Very easy to use, very easy to implement. It is immediate in terms of the response and feedback that you can gather. It is transparent in terms of it displays the results. I may vote on a question and I will see my results of the votes of my peers. And it is anonymous. Therefore, it offers a low risk environment to the student where they can be much more honest in terms of their understanding. So given these characteristics, how might this translate into improved learning in face-to-face sessions? Well, to start answering this question, I'm going to try and adapt a model outlined by Nicol and Macfarlane-Dick back in 2006 on formative assessment and feedback. Now, I have a soft spot for this model, and I'll be honest, I do have a soft spot for this model because it places the student at the centre of the process. So, for instance, as you look through it, the student is responsible for effectively internalising the feedback and therefore making improvements. The effectiveness of this feedback is dependent on a number of internal factors associated with the student, such as their domain knowledge, the strategy, their motivational beliefs, and their own set goals. These influence the student's internal feedback loops, where there is a continual process of self-assessment which identifies where they are, what they know, which gaps exist, and identifies how they may deploy strategies to reduce these gaps. So what we're really saying with this model is that the student goes through a continual loop here of monitoring, of self-assessment, reflection, and monitoring what they know, how they know, what their peers know, etc. And you have a number of external factors occurring, such as the performance. And the key for me is the external feedback is the dialogue process. So this would be the opportunity of the student to, when they reflect on their own performance, they would get some feedback coming in. Now, this feedback, of course, could be either from the lecturer or from their peers. So there's some process there. Now, in terms of then the lecturer's role, we set tasks. We provide this external feedback in the model. We act as a point of inspiration. We help students set their own goals, and we help with motivation. And of course, we help with 1,000,001 other things. So now I just want to really focus on the dialogue process and try to go from the abstract to the specific. So what is the role of EVS to enhance this process? Right, as I walk through the following scenario, What I'd like you to do is compare this situation with a situation where there is no EVS, no audience response system in the face-to-face teaching. So a very traditional method, the one that I implemented myself as a lecturer many years ago. This is a situation where you ask students for a response and you ask them to raise their hands. So, the scenario. I'm assuming that you, the listener, are the student and I am the lecturer. So let's assume I put up a question in the lecture and ask you to make your vote. I have therefore set the task, the teacher sets the task. This then feeds in, and the degree to which you engage with this question will be influenced by your motivation and your goals. Therefore, some people may engage with an EVS and be very honest, and some may not. Some may pick strategies of guessing, some may pick strategies based on their own knowledge domain. Then, once they've gone through this internal process, they will vote. This will therefore come through as the performance box, and the question will close and the results will be displayed. Then we've got two really important external feedback loops here. Firstly, you, the student, can see how you performed compared to your peers, and you'll therefore reflect on this and internalise it. You know what you voted for and you can see the class breakdown. You'll also get instant external feedback from the lecturer, as I will discuss the results of the vote back and relate this back to what I perceive as the required domain knowledge. And in this instance, you should receive high quality feedback which will improve the way you self-assess and reflect where you are within your learning journey and effectively signpost where and when you need to make improvements. So compared to a traditional approach in a lecture of displaying hands or asking questions, this one, I would argue, is much more effective. The EVS therefore facilitates us being able to, either lecturer being able to set the task, you the student being able to go through your internal paths and feedback, then to have a performance, and then use the EVS as the conduit to start a dialogue between you, the individual, the class and the lecturer. Now, Nicol Macfarlane-Dick developed 7 principles of good feedback which would facilitate this model. And those are nicely displayed on the screen in front of you. So we've got all 7 there. Now, I think that the previous scenario I talked through highlights how appropriate the use of EVS is in face-to-face teaching. In particular, it facilitates the development of self-assessment. It encourages teacher and peer dialogue. This admittedly is mediated through an EVS activities and displayed on a screen in a room that may have hundreds of people in, but it does encourage a dialogue that was previously not there. It clarifies what a good performance is. You get a measure, a yardstick compared to your peers and compared to the so-called domain expert, or one of the domain experts at the front giving the lecture. It provides high quality information to the student about their learning, again within that dialogue process. And it's continual use, and this is the key point about appropriate uses of EVS. If you continually use it in an appropriate way, it will help the student start to close the gap, adopt strategies and therefore close the gap between themselves in their current position and their desired performance. So what about, and this is where I want to try to bring in an example from engineering, what about Principle 7, which provides information to teachers that can be used to help shape the teaching? This, I don't think, is a particularly common one, made reference in the literature and when discussed with academics about the use of EVS in teaching and learning and large group teaching. And I'm actually going to pick an example from Mark Russell, who's based at the University of Hertfordshire, who's published an area of this and teaches a large group undergraduate engineering course. So to set the context, it's the idea here, I've used the quote from Yorke on formative assessment in higher education. Assessors learn about the extent to which students have developed expertise and can be tailored their teaching accordingly. And how I'm interpreting this to say is that through, as Mark has done, through actually analysing the logs and the recorded logs from these sessions, he's able to piece together just exactly a model of what the student actually knows. And he looks at the log analysis after the lecture, and then he feeds this back into his next lecture when he's starting to unpick if students understand core concepts. Now, one of the wonderful things about that he's developed is this idea of coupling questions. So in his article, Using an Electronic Voting System to Enhance Learning and Teaching, his article here bases very much on the idea that if you simply ask them one question on a theme or a topic, then the results will be masked by people adopting guess strategies, or a guessing strategy. So what he has done is couple a number of questions together. Therefore, they may get the first question right, but if they get the first question right and completely understand the fundamental concepts, then you'd expect them to get question 1, question 2, and question 3 right. But they may make errors between the two questions. So he's used this method to highlight if students really do understand the fundamental concepts. So yes, he gives feedback there and then in the lecture, like we've discussed with the first 6 points, giving this lovely rich formative feedback, but he then uses the information he's gathered from that lecture to start to unpick if they have understand the concepts and where to take it from there. So far on our winding road, I've come across this idea, or I've proposed this idea that based on a model of formative feedback, EVS fits in very nicely to this and offers us great opportunities. And I've also shown you an example from Mark, which I think is a really good example of how you could use EVS over a number of lectures to get a much better understanding of student domain knowledge. So, is EVS the only solution? Well, there are some limitations with it, and I feel obliged to give you an alternative, which in fact it can be argued is in fact a complementary. So the limitation of audience response systems is they tend to ask objective or closed questions. So you come up with the questions, the student responds. However, there may be the opportunity, or I may want to, on one of the questions may include, I may want to open it up to much more a discursive, open, subjective question with a number of responses. Or I might have a question in there that says other, an option that says other, and I would like to take those that vote for other to contribute or to explain how they do that, or what the resource is. So this is where some people are starting to use an SMS web service such as Edutech or others, or there's Janet SMS, to look at the role therefore of collecting or student feedback and input in the lecture through text. So the example would be very, very simple. I might ask a more subjective question. I'll then ask you to text your response to a number. The student would then be given enough time to think about it, to internalise it, to text their response. I could then pick up the responses by logging on to the SMS text web service. I could read the responses. I could do something there and then. So I've been doing some quite exciting stuff, or I think is exciting stuff, with word clouds. So you can actually take out word frequencies within the responses to see if there's a patterns emerging. Alternatively, you might deal with the feedback not there and then in an immediate fashion, but you may have a delay where you go away, you read them, you may move them to discussion boards, you may adopt different strategies that you might want to use. The key is, for this to be effective, of course, is it's got to be effective feedback. You've got to be able to feed that back quickly to the students and to show that their input has been valued, you've acted upon it in that sense, and something's come out of it from a learning objective and a learning task. So we have a slowly starting to see the emergence of text-based or SMS feedback loops for large group teaching. Now, as I see it, and have tried it in a few presentations myself, I actually think they complement each other. So I'd walk in within my technology toolkit to help me achieve what I want to do in my lecture. I would use an ARS, an audience response system, as well as a free text response system, and I would mix the two up accordingly and appropriately. So that is it. So thank you very much for listening. They're my contact details, and I look forward to continuing, or actually having more of a debate and a discussion on the Subject Centre, the Engineering Subject Centre online seminar on this topic. Thank you.